Welcome, everyone, to Todd's World Beers with Jesus. Todd Allen here with you. Thank you for joining me today. I We are not joined by my normal co-host Carrie. She is out this week, and she's going to be out for the next couple weeks. She's dealing with some family loss and family tragedy. Unfortunately, late last week, her her husband passed away very unexpectedly. Um, and so obviously there's a lot to be dealt with, a lot that goes into that. I'm quite certain that she'll be back. And I can't wait until she is, quite frankly. Um, but unfortunately, life doesn't wait for anybody. When I got the news last week, it was upsetting, obviously. Things like that are. And I've been through quite a bit of loss, even in my own personal family over the years. Um, the fact I wrote a book about it, Leaves That Blew Away, my memoirs, available on Amazon. I'm going to read a couple excerpts out of it, or at least one. Um, but so I've had my own brushes, obviously, with unexpected passings and things, and as I was thinking about it last week when I got the news, and then I was trying to decide, well, what are we going to do with the podcast? Um, and I may have somebody else on just to kind of fill in as a guest host, but we've been going through the Book of Mark on this program, and we had just started back up. We'd taken December off uh, to do some Christmas, go through the Christmas story, and then we had just gotten back into Mark 14 last week. So I'm going to wait for Carrie to come back to finish Mark, and I just think that makes the most sense. Um, what I'm going to do this week, I just wanted to get a few comments and what have you, but and kind of an intro, and then after that, I think what I'm going to do is actually play. We're going to do a um, kind of one of our best of, I think, and and play a relatively large segment of a previous Beers with Jesus that when I went back and listened to it, it just felt like it fit. So, um, but when I got the news last week, I was upset, of course, um, and you just never you there's no sense to making things like that, and we've been what hit me, I guess, is we've been doing Beers with Jesus now. Todd's World's been on for 2 years. The first year we focused more on the stories. We had Insurrection season 1 and 2. We had Witness season 1. We had some other stories in there, and then we made the switch at the beginning of last year to doing the Wildly Opinionated News Hour and Beers with Jesus as our two flagship shows. And then I still write stories. We still have some other things that are thrown in there. But our weekly podcast are the Wildly Opinionated News Hour and Beers with Jesus. And actually, we did Beers with Jesus for almost, I don't know, 6 months or maybe even more before. And what we realized was that the episodes were getting to be about an hour and 45 minutes, and that the first 45 minutes we're talking about news and we're warming up and all this stuff that doesn't really have all that much to do with the Bible and with Jesus, which we were getting into. And so we just decided to split them up, and I think that has made great sense, and it's worked out really well. So I enjoy now. We release the Wildly Opinionated News Hour on Tuesdays, and we release Beers with Jesus on Wednesdays. And so if you haven't listened to this week's Wildly Opinionated News Hour, we spent a lot of time talking about the California fires, uh, causes, the failures, just everything involved. So worth a listen. I'd go listen if I were you. When you're done with this, you don't have to stop. It's not a to be continued. So, um, but anyway, anytime you get hit with someone in your close circle who passes away unexpectedly, I think it always impresses on you the fleetingness, how fleeting life is. I'm not sure fleetingness is a word. But anyway, how fleeting this life is that we have. And really we don't have any control over it at all. And you don't necessarily get warning. You don't get anything. We 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 live in a dangerous world from the standpoint of we all die, and none of us know when. By and large, there are people who you have terminal chronic diseases, and as you're getting into end stages, you can assume that short of a miracle, things aren't going to go well, and you're probably going to be punching out soon. Same is true once you get into your 80s or 90s. You think you've been here for a while. Not that anybody's ever ready to go, but my grandma I think was 95 when she finally passed, and she said she was ready to go. She seemed ready to go. So many people had gone on before, and friends and family gone, and she was ready to punch out. Um, but often you get people in there. Well, I mean, wherever you get kids that die, everything, but you get somebody in their 60s. And when I was a kid, and you'd hear about somebody in their 60s, I think, oh, well, they're pretty old. But then my dad died when he was 63, and he didn't seem old at all. And now I'm pushing 50, and 60s seeming a lot younger all the time. So, or the 60s. So, um, anyway, it's not what anybody kind of ever pictures coming. And so when the news hit you, it occurred to me that because Carrie and I had been doing Beers with Jesus for the last year, and we've been walking through the book of Mark, and basically just kind of exploring the story of Jesus. So if you've been walking through with us, we're just, we read the story and then we talk about the story, and that's basically it. There's not a lot of preaching. I don't think there's maybe a little teaching here and there, but that's not the primary goal. The primary goal is to learn together, to learn the story together. Um, maybe for those of us who know it, to maybe hear it with a fresh set of ears, I guess. Something that we look at it and we hadn't thought of it in that particular way, or whatever. Wherever kind of the spirit leads us is what we do. But we've talked a lot about suffering in that in the last year, on and off as it comes up. Um, but I think just I could have even been last week that we talked about, and I never did find. I have now. I didn't have the reference readily available in Hebrews, but the reference is Hebrews 5:7, and it says, while he lived on earth, talking about Jesus, while he lived on earth, anticipating death, Jesus cried out in pain and wept in sorrow as he offered up priestly prayers to God. Because he honored God, God answered him. Though he was God's son, he learned trusting obedience by what he suffered, just as we do. And we talked a little bit about that, how the idea that God putting on, becoming a man, putting on a body, had to relearn trusting obedience through his sufferings, it says. So, and Jesus, when he calls us to be his disciples, says, pick up your cross and follow me. The suffering is on the front end with Christianity. He did no, there's not going to be a life without it. It's part of it. It's trials, um, and we all go through them. We all go through them all the time. And if we're not going through them, family members are going through them, or friends are going through them all the time. It seems like we we know of and are somewhat surrounded by hurt and suffering and grief. And we look out on a world that just, it doesn't seem like, it seems like there's so much promise, but things never seem to work out right. At least in the natural. Um, I suspect that's probably purposeful by God. He doesn't want us to feel too at home here. You all know how much I like to quote C.S. Lewis. This is from The Problem of Pain. The Christian doctrine of suffering explains, I believe, a very curious fact about the world we live in. The settled happiness and security which we all desire, God withholds from us by the very nature of the world. But joy, pleasure, and merriment he has scattered broadcast. We are never safe, but we have plenty of fun and some ecstasy. It is not hard to see why. The security we crave would teach us to rest our hearts in this world and oppose an obstacle to our return to God. A few moments of happy love, a landscape, a symphony, a merry meeting with our friends, a bath, or a football match have no such tendency. Our Father refreshes us on the journey with some pleasant inns, but will not encourage us to mistake them for home. Uh, and like always, CS, he's just dead on. Um, it's a great, it's a great quote, and it's absolutely true. It was true of Jesus while he was here. So we're not in anything. There's nothing special necessarily about us. We can't expect to be treated that much better by a world than our master was. In Psalm 31, he this is a David psalm written by King David, and I'm just going to read a few excerpts. I run to you, God. I run for dear life. Don't let me down. Take me seriously this time. You're my cave to hide in, my cliff to climb. I've put my life in your hands. You won't drop me. You'll never let me down. You saw my pain. You disarmed my tormentors. You didn't leave me in their clutches, but gave me room to breathe. Be kind to me, God. I'm in deep, deep trouble again. I cried my eyes out. I feel hollow inside. My life leaks away groan by groan. My years fade out in sighs. My troubles have worn me out, turned my bones to powder. Desperate, I throw myself on you. You are my God. Hour by hour, I place my days in your hand, safe from the hands out to get me. Don't embarrass me by not showing up. What a stack of blessing you have piled up for those who worship you, ready and waiting for all who run to you to escape an unkind world. God takes care of all who stay close to him. And then this is the final verse, 24 in Psalm 31. Be brave, be strong, don't give up. Expect God to get there soon. Expect God to get here soon. I suppose it depends on who you're talking to. But that has always been a verse that resonates with me that I go back to when you're struggling with loss or trials or whatever we struggle with in this life. I go back and I see God saying, be brave, be strong, don't give up, expect God to get here soon. In Revelation, one of the names of God is the God about to arrive. And sometimes when you're in the on the front end of that grief and that shock and everything that goes along with it, it feels like sometimes it can feel like you're alone. Like, where was God? Didn't he see this coming? You know, we pray to him, we do all this for him, we try to we try to be sensitive to his spirit and all these things, and yet we're not exempt from sorrow. We're not exempt from trials. And the advice is always the same. Be brave, be strong, don't give up. Expect God to get here soon. In Psalm 37, and I think um I believe I quoted some of this a few episodes back. I can't remember exactly, but one of the verses in 34 is wait passionately for God. Don't leave the path. Also in Psalm 37, um, sorry, I'm looking for it here. Open up before God, keep nothing back. He'll do whatever needs to be done. Stalwart walks in step with God, his path blazed by God, he's happy. If he stumbles, he's not down for long. God has a grip on his hand. Turn your back on evil, work for the good, and don't quit. God loves this kind of thing and never turns away from his friends. So these are just some words of encouragement, scriptures of encouragement that have been kind of running through my mind over this past weekend and early this week. Just thinking about things, preparing for this broadcast to come to you guys. So for the past year, we've been doing Beers with Jesus, and I think that as I went back and I listened to some old episodes, I thought, God was, in hindsight, of course, in hindsight, you can see where some of the conversations turned and where some of the shows went, that God was preparing us for 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 trials and for sufferings to come. It wasn't always going to be easy, and we'd talk about it, and then when you least expect it, the time comes up, and that's when we hope that we find fruit, like the fruit of the Spirit growing in us, and we find that God does show up in our time of need. And I believe He does. I believe He has. I believe He will. And I am, uh, in spite of, in spite of sorrow, in spite of disappointment, I'm excited about what God has in store. I'm excited about what God has prepared for us going forward. So I'm excited for Carrie to get back. I'll handle the next few solo probably, and I wanna read you the very end. I told you I've got a book out on called Leaves That Blew Away. It's a memoir. Um, I thought of it kind of at the time as my journey through loss and failure. So, but I think you'll find it's a good read, and that it's not like a big downer all the time. So toward the end of the book, uh, I'm wrapping things up a little bit. Obviously, it's a memoir, and I made this statement. I said, I understand far fewer of the morals to the story than I feel like I should by this age. Life is messy. It resists the structure we try to impose on it. If the pieces fit, it is in a mural only God could design. I catch glimpses on those rare occasions when the veil between this world and eternity stretches especially thin. When my mom and dad are close, and I can almost feel them next to me, and I think maybe I see just a shadow of the picture he's painting of my life. But even the shadow is rich and deep and beautiful. I don't know how that could be. When I look back, I don't remember it that way. I believe that in the end, when we get home, to the home we're designed for, when we're with Jesus, I think that when we're known as we're known now, or when we know as we're known, I think that something like that will be the experience that we all have, where we see this unbelievable, beautiful mural that God has painted of our lives. And even though we're overjoyed by it, we look at it and think, I don't understand that because I don't remember it that way. When I lived it, it didn't feel that way. But God works all things together for good, and He's such a good God, such a faithful God, even in our times of sorrow and of hurt. So, thanks for joining me today, guys. We're going to roll into a discussion that we had back in August, I believe, and it's right it's in the passage in Mark. I think it's Mark 6, and it's directly following the feeding of the 5,000, when Jesus is tells his disciples to go out on the sea and to cross the Sea of Galilee to the other side at night in the middle of a storm. and and when I went back and listened this week, I just thought, it's so good. And it's Carrie and I doing what we do on Beers with Jesus all the time. Of course, none of us, she had no idea, I had no idea what was coming, that we would be dealing with things, and yet there's truth in it. And so I wanna kind of leave us with that. It's a little probably longer section. What I did is I peeled off. I think this was before we had split it up between Beers with Jesus and had the separate news hour. So we're gonna start at just the Jesus portion. So I'm editing out all the um, all the news and all that kind of stuff, and we're gonna get right into the Bible portion. We're going to leave you with that this week, and we will be back next week, or at least I'll be back next week. And we'll see where we go from there. I really don't know. I know that when Carrie gets back, we'll get back into Mark, and that'll probably be a few weeks yet. So thanks for joining us today, guys. You can find us on the socials at Todd's World 2023, and stay tuned for the storm on the lake and Jesus walking on the water. It's a great passage. So I think you're going to enjoy it. Hopefully you enjoyed it the first time around. Maybe you missed it. Could be a new listener. Here you go. It's kind of a best of. Enjoy. We'll see you next week. Okay, walking on the sea. So this is right after, this is in the message, and it starts in Mark 6 around verse 45 till the end.
Mm-hmm.
As soon as the meal was finished, Jesus insisted that the disciples get in the boat and go on ahead across to Bethsaida while he dismissed the congregation. After sending them off, he climbed a mountain to pray. Late at night, the boat was far out at sea. Jesus was still by himself on land. He could see his men struggling with the oars, the wind having come up against them. At about 4 o'clock in the morning, Jesus came toward them, walking on the sea. He intended to go right by them. But when they saw him walking on the sea, they thought it was a ghost and screamed, scared to death. Jesus was quick to comfort them. Courage, it's me, don't be afraid. As soon as he climbed into the boat, the wind died down. They were stunned, shaking their heads, wondering what was going on. They didn't understand what he had done at the supper. None of this had yet penetrated their hearts. They beached the boat at Gennesaret and tied up at the landing. As soon as they got out of the boat, word got around fast. People ran this way and that, bringing their sick on stretchers to where they heard he was. Wherever he went, village or town or country crossroads, they brought their sick to the marketplace and begged him to let them touch the edge of his coat. That's all. And whoever touched him became well. There you go.
There we go.
Did I live up to the hype?
Yes, you did great. You did great. Yeah, so the famous walking on the water.
Yeah, the first, maybe the second time. He does it a couple different times. He stilled
like
the
the
storm
first-
a couple different times. I think this is
Right.
the first one. He was asleep in the boat and he stilled the storm already.
Mm-hmm.
And then this is the first time he walks on the water. There's another
Mhm.
time he walks on the water where Peter wants to
right?
go out. And I don't think they're the same story. I don't think.
Yeah, I thought it was going to be that, but it was this one. I'm like, oh yeah, it's a separate story. So,
What'd you think?
Well,
Well,
well, it's funny how I read these differently now because we've discussed them in such detail, and they're just a couple details that are really interesting to me. So one of them that I don't understand is that he can see the men struggling with the oars.
and they're probably 2 or 3 miles out to sea
Right.
in the dark.
So, right. I was like, that's
Even with a
interesting.
full moon, I mean, that's eyesight like a hawk.
Mm-hmm. I did look up on a map there on the Sea of Galilee, and it's not like the ocean. And even
Well,
in
no.
some translations, they call it a lake, but it is the Sea of Galilee. But it's not that far. But still, where he is and where they are, you wouldn't be able to see them struggling. So I thought
No,
that was
probably not.
interesting that
Not
he
if
could,
not if they're 2 or 3 miles out, probably.
right. So I
It's
bring that up
doubtful.
just because you and I have talked in this about what Jesus knows and what he doesn't know.
Yeah.
And so I found that interesting that
I feel like this
he's
is one of
aware of
those
what they're
times
going
where
through.
he's tapping into to the deity side.
Right.
That's what it
A
seems like to me.
supernatural sight.
I mean, even if it's a full moon, even if it's all these things, and I
Yeah.
mean, you can see a long way.
I mean, they'd be a speck. They'd be a speck out there. He
But
would be able
yeah,
to tell what was going on. So
yeah.
I found that really interesting. And the thing I wanted to ask you about is it says he intended to go right by them.
Mm-hmm.
Like, why is that? Is he walking to, uh,
Here's
do you
he's
call it
walking to where they're
Gessen-
going. I mean, that's what
Gennesaret? Like, is he just walking there? Like,
that's
he's
what
like
it
out
seems
on
like. He
nature
prayed for
there?
a while. Now he's just going to meet him there.
Right. Like,
And they're, mind you, the wind's against them, so they're
he
going
was,
slow.
he was just going to walk by. I find that an interesting detail.
It's a
So,
very interesting detail, I think.
so,
And any of the things that there was a couple of things
mhm.
um that struck me on this one. The worst, probably, that the most unexplainable, was the one that they didn't understand what he had done at the supper. None of that had yet penetrated their heart. But we'll get into that in a
Right.
minute. But so
Okay.
our old friend Will was over this morning. He spent a few days here with me,
He was
and
doing some Greek translation.
and we were talking about it because I was reading this morning, and I'm like, man, there's parts of this that are really kind of weird.
Kind of
Like,
weird.
from a story standpoint, because that's how I look
Right.
at it. You know what I mean? We're looking at it like a story. And
Totally.
so we're getting these details on this story, and it's like, well, you start with the fact that he sends them off. First of all, he's going to deal with the crowd on his own. He's going to dismiss them on his own.
Mm-hmm.
Clearly, I think it's clear to me that, first of all, people didn't try to cross the Sea of Galilee at night. If fishermen went out, they were well within sight of shore because they're fishing closer to shore. They're
Mm-hmm.
not probably a mile out, probably, half mile, whatever, wherever the breaks are and things where the
Sure.
fish are gathering. But the Sea of Galilee was known for storms. It was known for really bad storms. It could get really bad
Okay.
really fast. And Peter, James, John, we know they were all fishermen.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they've been on this lake their whole lives. Their fathers were probably fishermen. They know this lake, right?
Right.
So I have a feeling, whether or not, I heard a commentator say once that Jesus knew that a storm was coming, and maybe he did, but whether he did or not, I guarantee you, Peter knew a storm was coming, and they and and Jesus sends them off into it anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And that, to me, that's an interesting piece. It's interesting that he then goes alone onto a mountain to pray.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting that he watches them for a while struggling.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? All those things are kind of, I don't know. Maybe we don't like, there's things I don't like to picture necessarily, even though I think it's clear that this is what we have.
Right.
But I don't necessarily love the picture of a God who intentionally sends me into storms and then watches me struggle for half the night. You know what I
Sure.
mean?
Yes.
And
That's fair.
and yet that's exactly the kind of God that it appears like we have. And really, if I think back on my experience of living, that's exactly the kind of God that we have. I feel like I've spent an awful lot of time rowing, getting nowhere, and feeling like God doesn't really care that much. Now, that's what I felt like in that moment. You know what I'm saying? I'm
Right.
not saying God doesn't. I think he does.
Right.
But it feels like he doesn't. If you're the disciples and you think, I mean, we could drown. You
Right.
know,
He sent us out
and he
here.
sent us out here. Now they don't know that he's watching them. We get that detail, and then and then you finally get to the point where he's walking on the waves, and then it says he's just going to pass them by, and you're like, what?
Right.
Like, it doesn't make a lot of sense.
It doesn't. Now, this storm doesn't seem it's not as severe as the one we read about before,
Maybe not.
where he's sleeping. Like, it just the winds came up, they're struggling with the oars. So let's just say this isn't like a life-threatening storm. It doesn't sound as bad.
Maybe
but
not.
But
Okay, maybe it's not a life-threatening storm. So
okay.
maybe they're just having to work really hard to get
Hmm.
anywhere. Because I mean, that's
Right.
what happens when you're going against the wind,
Hmm.
right? Didn't Bob Seger teach us that?
Oh, repeatedly.
But right, it's really difficult. It's
So,
difficult in a motorized speedboat going against the wind. Like
yeah.
there's a big difference in your top speed depending on whether you're with the wind or against the wind and fighting the waves.
Hmm.
And so when they're just rowing, um, why does it say he intended? You know what I think?
Tell me.
What I wonder anyway is Jesus sent them out there. And so this because when he says it happens right on the heels of the feeding the 5,000,
Hmm.
which happened right on the heels of the disciples coming back from their ministry. One of
Okay.
the things that's kind of interesting about that is that these are probably the biggest crowds that Jesus ever got.
Hmm.
We're right in this small time frame. Because when he gets
Okay.
over to Bethsaida, we aren't going to see it in Mark, but when you get into John, there's a point he has this long conversation, and it's still centered around he fed them. Like he says, these crowds are only coming to him because he gave them a bunch of free meal, basically, and they're just looking for more. They're looking for more food, right?
Okay.
And Jesus goes into this kind of long teaching on how he's the bread of life and you're going to have to eat his flesh and drink his blood. And all of a sudden, all of these crowds begin to think that he's talking about cannibalism. They freak out. And Jesus does the one thing that in our culture we never do. Like, we always want to lean into whatever popularity you get and ride it, right? You want to ride that wave. And Jesus destroyed the crowds as soon as he started getting thousands. And it's again, it's like an upside down thing.
It's
But
funny.
but this story, I think, is just it's inextricably woven in with the feeding of the 5,000. And I think that what he was trying, remember at the feeding of the 5,000. So his
Hmm.
disciples thought everything went on long enough and they're trying to get him to dismiss the people, right? So they can go
Right.
home and buy supper, whatever.
Hmm.
And remember what Jesus says to him. He says, "You do it, fix supper for him." And
Right.
they're like, "What are you talking about?"
Yeah. Like,
And
what do
then
you
it
want us to
says,
do?
but he was quite serious. They started to realize how serious he was. He was so serious, he went on to make a way for them to do what he had told them to do, which was to feed the people.
That's
So
right.
he
So when he started,
multiplied the bread, they passed it out. They fed
he
the
also
people.
like grouped the people together in circles and stuff
Well, he
so
had the
that they could.
disciples do it, right? And
Okay.
so he's kind of, even though he's providing, it's the disciples who are facilitating what he has told them to do. You
Okay.
know what I mean?
Hmm.
Well, I think that maybe when it says that they didn't understand what he had done at supper, or when we're talking about him maybe passing by, or when we're talking about him sending them into the storm, I think that probably had Jesus not gone in and the lake not stilled, it
Hmm.
may have taken them another 8 hours, but they would have made it across. They could have done this.
Yes.
In other words, wherever they were going, they could have gone, they could have gotten there, and it would have been a hell of a journey. They'd have been tired, but they would have, that maybe you're right. They weren't, it wasn't life threatening. Does that make sense? Real bad,
Yeah.
lot
Right.
of struggle,
Yeah.
but they
Difficult.
could have made it.
Yes.
What makes me wonder about that is the fact that Jesus is watching them. He's praying for him, and then when he takes off, he's just going to keep on going. He doesn't seem that concerned about them. Like they're going to make it. You know what I mean?
Right.
And then when it says that they didn't understand what he had done at the supper, none of this had yet penetrated their hearts. I wonder if part of what he was doing at that feeding of the 5,000 is he's teaching his disciples, when you see a need, you're already equipped to meet it. Because if you go back further to where he's talking to the 12 and he sends them out and he says, you don't need special equipment.
Right.
You don't need this. You don't need that. So when God calls you to something, or when you see a need or whatever, you have it in you to take care of that. What does
Hmm.
that mean? Could the disciples have multiplied the meal? Well, maybe they had already been out doing miracles, casting out demons, healing the sick, and everything else
Hmm.
when he sent them out in pairs. So maybe it is something where Jesus is saying, now, obviously, all of it would be through him to some extent. All faith is through him and the power
Right.
is in Jesus. But meaning we're empowered to do whatever he calls us to do. Does that make sense?
Yes, that if he tells us to do something, he's going to equip us, and we have faith, then we have everything we need.
And maybe that's what, because Mark is mostly the transcribed words of Peter. And maybe
Okay.
that's what Peter was trying to get at here when he's communicating through Mark, which is we hadn't yet grasped that concept. We hadn't
Mhm.
understand, because the other thing about the feeding of the 5,000, it's such a seminal miracle. It's such an important miracle. It is the only miracle that's recorded in depth in all four gospels,
Okay.
even the Gospel of John. Usually you have the synoptic gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and they have
Mhm.
kind of similar stuff. I sent you that one thing. Well, John's
Right.
totally different,
Right.
probably because John was written later and John had the scope of the first three and just wanted to do something a little different. Whatever.
Mhm.
But point is that this is an important thing. And so whatever they're talking about, whatever the Peter's saying, we didn't quite understand it yet then.
Mhm.
It was centered in this multiplication, this Jesus telling them you do it, and then providing a way for them to do it. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And so I think he was going to walk by because they were going to make it. You know what I mean? And it was going to be tough. And he knew when he sent them they were going to make it. And he knew it was going to be tough. Now, then he gets in and when they freak out because they see him, and
They think he's a ghost.
why wouldn't they freak out? But
Right.
I mean,
Oh my God.
like the entire
Right.
thing, that part is a little like, what were you expecting exactly? I mean, you could have walked a little farther off, but
Sure.
maybe we
Right.
can assume it was a clear night, I guess.
Mhm.
Maybe we can assume there's something to the fact. I don't know if you're up in a mountain. And I do know this, that when I've been out, like, I don't know, 7 miles offshore in Lake Michigan, it's amazing
Mhm.
how far you can see. I can still, by and large, mostly kind of see the shore. Now, I couldn't see anything going
Okay.
on, but if they were only a mile or two out and you were up on a mountain and it was a real clear night,
Mhm.
maybe at least see the boat. I don't know. But and so maybe it was a clear night in spite of the wind that the disciples, it didn't matter that Jesus was 100 yards off, they could still see him. You know what I mean?
So, but why do you think so you're connecting this feeding of the 5,000 with this that the disciples didn't fully understand yet? I mean, yeah, they were, I'm sure, just going through it and they were like, where's all this food coming from? And I'm sure they didn't have time to stop and really process it. I mean, we know the story, so it's easy for
Right.
us to say it was a miracle. It was incredible.
Yeah.
They should have been standing there in awe. But I'm sure that they were busy with the logistics of passing everything out and gathering.
Well, and as soon as they do all that,
boats.
he sends them out on the
Yeah,
lake.
then they're off. So I'm sure they're talking about it on the boat. And it makes me wonder if Jesus knew what they were talking about, knew that they didn't fully understand. They're probably like, what was that? Did you see how
Yeah.
much food we have? Where did all that food come from? And I'm sure if they're regular people, even though Jesus has already performed miracles, it still has to be a little stunning to see it, to process it.
Yeah.
So if he could see them from afar, if he could kind of in his mind,
Mm-hmm.
supernaturally see that they were struggling in the water that far away, maybe he also knew that maybe that's why it's written this way. Maybe Jesus knew that they didn't fully understand what had just happened. Did he decide to walk? Did he decide to walk because he wanted to show them out something else amazing right on top of that, like you say, on the heels of, and say, hey,
And
look at
maybe
this
part of it
too.
is they didn't fully yet grasp that he was God, the
Mhm.
Messiah,
Right.
because I think it's in Job somewhere
Mhm.
when God's going off on Job. I'm not positive if that's where, but it's in Job somewhere, and it talks about Yahweh, Jehovah,
Mhm.
walks on the waves. So that would
Hmm.
be in the Jewish mind one of the things of which
Ooh.
God has dominion over the sea, right?
Okay. Well,
Only Yahweh can walk on the ocean.
that's an important connection, because then that would be not just an amazing miracle,
It's
based on the
another
natural
sign.
natural world. That's something that references
Yeah.
a scripture that they're familiar with, you're saying.
Yeah.
Got
But I
it.
do think it's an interesting thing because I've said this before. God will do everything he has to get us to where he wants us to go,
Mhm.
but nothing that we can do. Right.
Gotcha. Yeah, you have said that before.
And I think that's true. And I think maybe that's part of it. I think we're more capable than we realize. Now, when I say that, we're more capable in Christ. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Within his power already. The disciples
Right.
should have had some idea that they just spent a few weeks away, whatever, doing all this stuff.
Mhm.
And I mean, not on their own. It's still the power of Jesus working through them, but still, he wasn't right there doing it. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
they were the ones healing. They were the ones doing it. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
It's a semantics thing to say that they were versus, but my only point is that they had it within them to reach out and do it. And I think even with the feeding of the 5,000, I was thinking
Mhm.
about this. I was thinking how Jesus breaks the bread and the fish, right?
Mhm.
And they're multiplying. But the people that are there, by and large, they probably knew that nobody had any food. Right? They probably caught on to the idea that everybody's a little hungry and there wasn't like food trucks set up.
Well, right. And they didn't have, you picture baskets. I remember when I was young, we'd see workbooks, illustrating this, and there'd be these tall baskets. I
Right.
mean, feeding 5,000 people, there'd be like rows and rows of those baskets if they had enough food to feed those people.
Right. And none
Obviously,
of
they
them could
didn't
see
have
them.
that. Right.
But what I started thinking about it was after our podcast,
Hmm.
and I was still thinking about it. And I thought, it took I don't know how much, but it took some faith on the part of the people to take the fish and the loaves and eat it. You could have had skeptics among them who would have been like, I don't know where whatever they're trying to claim as food came from, but I know that there was no food here and I'm not eating it. You know what I mean? I mean,
Maybe.
it could
Wait,
be like,
wait. Sorry, this is not
I'm
important,
talking about the people.
but I'm gonna back up.
Okay.
You're saying there might have been people who said, I'm not gonna eat that?
There could have been
Okay.
skeptics in the
Can you
crowd.
imagine? Imagine being so skeptical that you missed, like, you missed the miraculous meal.
Well, it's just like, there was none of this here before. Like, what is
Yeah.
going on? You know what I
Uh-huh.
mean? The people who try to overthink everything.
Right.
Maybe. I know it's a little different, but my
Sure.
point is,
Anyway.
it certainly took faith from the disciples to
Hmm.
collect these things of food and then pass them out. And I feel like all around it took not only does God have to bless us, it takes some faith to receive the blessing. It takes some
Okay.
faith to live into it. I was thinking about this in regards to like maybe you've been in a time of like struggle and then God starts to kind of bless you. Well, you're so used to living so tight for so long, sometimes it's hard to actually live into that blessing. You know what I mean? So even that
Hmm.
takes a little bit of faith and a little bit of learning. Does that make
Sure.
sense?
Yes. Yeah, you can get stuck in a mindset or a way of thinking or a way of living and
Yeah.
maybe not even recognize a blessing in your life.
So I just feel like this whole chapter, this whole thing is kind of working together, and Jesus is kind of showing us this is how God works.
Hmm.
Like, I don't know what you thought it was, but it's really this, right?
Right.
And mostly it blows out all the preconceptions and everything out of the water, and it leaves you. But by the time, if we were to read, by the time we get to the end of this, they get to the other side of the town, and then all these people are coming and they want to be healed and everything. And then in
Hmm.
John's gospel, we see that Jesus has this big like confrontation with them, and then it says that a bunch of them leave. Like, and you get the idea half the crowd or more is left
Okay.
because he's been so offensive, because that's what he does all the time. And then he turns to the disciples and he says, well, are you going to leave me too? And Peter says, where are we going to go? Like, it's interesting to me that after all of this, maybe sometimes in your faith, after you've been through a lot, if the only thing that keeps you is the lack of better options of where to turn, that's okay. God will take that. God will take that little bit if that's what it takes. Do you know what I mean?
It sounds pretty weak, but I hear what you're saying.
I mean, it's just it's an up and down roller coaster that they've been on, and now Jesus is walking. I mean, all of these things are they're impossible in their minds,
Yes.
and they're constantly being bombarded with these things that are impossible.
Right. I wish they wrote that way. I
I mean,
wish Mark
that's what's
wrote a little
happening.
bit about besides, does he say they were amazed? I can't even remember.
I think so.
Anyway, but I mean, they're scared.
They were stunned, shaking their heads, wondering what was going on. So yeah, they've been through it. Like this is
I
a lot.
know. I mean, I guess.
You know what makes me think of? I'm rereading right now.
Okay.
Um, Salem's Lot by Stephen King.
Ah,
It's a really good story. I don't know if you've ever read it, but anyway,
that's an old one.
it
That's
is
one of his
old.
early ones.
His first book was Carrie, and the second book was Salem's Lot. So it's in
Okay.
like the late 70s,
Wow.
and uh, but it's so good. And the whole premise of the thing is that these vampires come to this small town in Maine and start to take it over, and
Okay.
anyway, that's and it sounds cheesy, but it's so well written that he pulls it off. But every movie that's tried to been done, it's really cheesy.
Really? They can't do
But
it?
Stephen King pulled it off and how he wrote it, and it's really good. But one of the things that it made me think of is these guys, there's a group of like three kind of or four main characters trying to convince this priest of what's going on, and
Okay.
they keep running into, yeah, but all of these things are impossible for themselves, for other people. Like, what do you mean vampires? It's insane. And they keep, but all of this keeps, like, the proofs keep coming on. You know what I mean? To the point where
Hmm.
they can't deny it anymore. Well, I think that's kind of what the disciples were, is that everything happening to them is impossible. It just
Right?
isn't. Everything Jesus is doing, it's impossible, and it keeps coming.
But it's funny that, I mean, they've been with Jesus for a while now. They've seen incredible things. They see him out walking on the water. You would think that they would shout out and be like, Jesus, is that you? What are you
Yeah.
doing? Instead, they're terrified. They think it's a ghost. They.
Well, because how would Jesus walk on the
I
water?
don't know, but wouldn't you just be like, Jesus, what are you
Well, to
doing? Is
be
that
fair,
you?
that I think the next time it happens, they recognize him. And
Hmm.
Peter says, "If it's really you, call me to walk out to you." So there is that
There's
growth
growth.
is happening.
Okay,
You know
good.
how Jesus was it in here that he talked to, or went in Galatians maybe, where he talks about how it's like fruit growing in an orchard,
Yes.
right? So it's happening. It's imperceptible day to day.
Okay.
Maybe even week to week, it's a little hard. You can see a little bit. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
But it's happening, and it is happening. We do see it in the disciples. It's not like, Peter is going to confess that Jesus is the Messiah and he's the Lord, and they're going to have a real hard time with the crucifixion, obviously,
Right.
and everything associated with that. But when Jesus, when he's risen and he appears to them, I mean, these are the people that he built the church on, man. So
Hmm.
they
Right.
become some solid dudes, right?
Like you said, they're going through it. They're definitely
Yeah.
going through it to get there. Well, okay. So can we talk about what you brought
Yes.
up that they didn't understand? I
Yeah.
mean, can we talk about
Whatever
that
you
some
talk about,
more?
whatever you want, Carrie.
Well, I'm just
I've been
saying
talking long enough.
you're
I got
good.
to drink
No,
some beer.
drink some beer.
You gotta carry your part of the show.
Well, you brought up, and
I've already multiplied the fishes and the loaves. You have to pay them out. No, I'm just kidding. Go
Ah,
ahead.
no, you brought up how they didn't understand what had happened at the supper, the feeding of the 5,000.
Yep.
None of this had yet penetrated their hearts. Now we touched on this a little bit just in the conversation, but this by in and of itself, we discussed it briefly
This morning
early. Yeah,
we're
this morning,
puzzling it out.
puzzling it out. I mean,
I'm still puzzling. I still don't know if I'm just guessing.
right?
I'm
I
just
mean, right.
spitballing here.
So the none of this had yet penetrated their hearts. I was curious. I'm always curious of other translations, and I read it, and it says that their hearts were hardened. They didn't understand it, and their hearts were hardened. And I was like, what? That surprised me. We don't have to get into that.
You know what I think that is?
Hmm.
I actually think that's a relatively simple
Okay.
explanation. I think, and I don't think it's any different for them than it is for us. I think by and large, all of our hearts are hardened to the spiritual by just day-to-day life. Our life in this world
Okay.
hardens our hearts to the
Sure.
spiritual. And I think a big part of what God does, maybe what he was doing here, I don't know, but part of what he does through struggles, through sufferings, through all this is he's chipping away at it. You know what
Sure.
I mean?
Yes.
trying to get us to where our hearts are soft enough to actually accept him.
Right. I
I
believe
think. I
that.
don't know. I just think by and large it's a reason everything's impossible. We think we know everything. We've
Mhm.
got science. You know what I
Right,
mean?
exactly. Yeah. So I had one of my sons. Did you read my text to you about?
No, I forgot.
Oh,
It
so
got lost in
it's okay. So I was
the
talking with
haze
one of
of
my sons.
a
We
lot
very,
of beers on the
very,
golf course.
very short, very short version is we were talking about prayer, and he was saying, "Well, you can." I was talking about talking with God, talking to God, and he's like, "Well, you can talk like to God, you can talk at God, but it's not a conversation."
Mm.
And I'm like, "Well, what do you mean?" He's like, "Well, it's not like you're going to hear an answer."
Hmm.
And here, in the context of what we're saying, I think, well, his heart is definitely hardened. He doesn't believe that he hasn't opened up that part to really listen for God's
Yeah.
response. And I told him, I said, there are times, I mean, you have to practice it, but there are times God talks to you. And we talked about like this stat specifically. And I said, it's not like you hear a voice. I said, everybody's different, but I know the times that, like the times I've been told you need to go talk to that woman, you
Hmm.
know,
Right. Yeah.
it's like, it's not a voice. It's not
Right.
like someone whispering in
But it
your
might as well
ear.
be.
It might as well be. It's like the message is sent,
Yeah.
and the message is sent in very plain language,
And it's received.
and it's received, and it's undeniable. It's not like a, oh, she looks like she's in trouble, I should go talk to her. It's more like someone almost like, nudging you, like, hey,
Yeah.
over there. And it's really interesting. So I was trying to explain to him that. And I think that's, like you said, daily life hardens our hearts. And when our hearts are not hardened, we can receive messages like that. We can hear from God. Um, we can see the miracles that are happening in our lives all the time.
Right.
It might not be it might not be something so big and public, but I think I think God's working in our lives often. And if our
I think
hearts,
I do too. I think that's the kind of thing, though. I think you only know it when it happens.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's the kind of truth you can only experience. Do you know what I mean?
Yes,
In other words, you can't, because it doesn't make any sense. And I mean,
yes,
really, it
that's
doesn't
another
make it
thing. It
to
makes zero sense.
to your son Patrick. I can't remember which one it was,
Yes.
but it doesn't. I mean, you gotta say, yeah, it's not from any kind of common definition of a dialogue or a conversation. It isn't that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But once you've experienced it, then it's like it's more than a conversation. You know what I mean? And so it's
Right.
it's this kind of thing that you can't. I guess I would always tell people, this was my experience was, um it's always through the Bible. I mean 97, 98% of the time, like God's speaking to you through the Bible.
Okay.
That's just,
For you, that's your
I think it's
experience.
for anybody.
Okay. Got it.
Um and in fact, I think only to the extent that you actually understand and are in the Bible, for
Hmm.
the most part, are you going to get any of the, then as the Bible starts to work you over, you know what I mean? It starts to kind of remodel you and kind of reconstruct the neurons and whatever you want to call it. But
Sure.
as that happens, as Jesus starts to make a new creation out of us, then we start to hear him, all through. But even so, a lot of the times it still passes through the lens of the Bible. We're still hearing something that would be, maybe it's a scripture, maybe it's something that Jesus said, maybe it's a story that we've heard, but
Hmm.
it's still finding a lot of its basis here. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
And so I think that's where you begin to hear him. So in other words, this is the easiest way to get to know God's voice. Without that, I don't know that you could know it. Now, if he's in a burning bush and then
Right. Yeah.
right.
You have
And
something present
there are
itself.
times where that happens. I'm not saying there's not. But by and
Hmm.
large, this is how you learn to hear God's voice, and
Hmm.
then as you learn to speak Spanish, you start to hear it a little bit. You know what I mean? But I think it's the same
Sure.
with this. I think as you learn to hear
Okay.
God's voice, he can talk to you till you learn what his voice sounds like and who he is.
Okay.
You're not going to recognize it even if he did most of the time. That's what I think. I don't know.
When you can I ask, I'm going to ask you this on the air. When
Hmm.
you are doing your morning devotionals and your prayers and stuff, do you ever feel like you get answers to things in those times, in those
Yeah.
prayer times?
Oh, for sure.
Okay, that's
But
cool.
honestly, a lot of the time, uh, this is gonna. I don't know. This is my experience. A lot of times with me,
Hmm.
and that is true. Yeah, I do feel it then. But frequently, I'll be like, I'll be like struggling with something or whatever, and then I'll think of a verse that's just the most obvious thing in the world. Like, there's no reason. Like, I didn't need any special revelation for that question. But for
Like it
whatever
makes it so plain. Is that
but
what
for
you're
whatever
saying?
reason, all of a sudden it'll like click. And I just feel like God's like, well, yeah, of course. And I think the same thing. I think, of course. Why didn't I know that? Of course, that's what he says. It's like all over the Bible. How did I not? You know what I mean? But it's like it'll finally click on something
Mhm.
that I'm thinking about, or I'm kind of puzzling through, or struggling with, or whatever. And it'll be a verse. It'll just be, right there. But I
Okay.
mean, I told you the verse that's kind of my, I don't know, half-ass life verse, whatever you want to call it,
Oh yeah, I remember it being good,
is
but I
just
can't
go
remember
ahead
what
and
it is.
do it. God says there's plenty. So that answers a lot of questions. I don't, I don't,
It really does,
and
doesn't
it's,
it?
and then I'll come back to it and I'll be like, yeah, that was it all along. Just go ahead and do it. And I think that's here. Like, if the disciples were struggling with going out onto the lake,
Hmm.
well, just go ahead and do it.
Just
God
do it.
says there's plenty, you know?
Right.
If they're
Right.
in the middle of rowing and they feel like they're never going to get there,
Hmm.
well, just keep going. God said, God's not going to leave us hanging.
Right.
He didn't send us out here to die.
Jesus sent us out here. Right.
He just multiplied everything for us. I mean, yeah, this one might be a tougher call, but what are we going to get out of it? Well, we're going to get a fresh understanding of God, because we're going to see him do something that in the Jewish mind only God does, or really in any of our minds.
Right.
But it's clear within, you know, within Job, and it's just like, yeah. And so all of this is starting to chip away at them, starting to their hearts were hardened there, but I don't know that their hearts were any more especially hardened than anybody else's. We all have
Okay.
hard hearts in this world.
Got it.
And you're going to see that throughout with the crowds and with whoever, that, their hearts were hardened, or they were like
Hmm.
sheep without a shepherd, or they had ears but couldn't hear, eyes but couldn't see. It's all the same thing.
Hmm.
It's all the devil, the world, whatever you want to call it. But it's that what we feel like is so real, pressing in and telling us, no, any of that's all crazy talk. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Yes.
This is the
So,
only thing that's real, is what you can touch and feel.
yeah, the science.
Uh-huh.
So, in the past, in the recent past, when we've been reading through Mark and we've talked about um, people's hearts being hardened, it has been in those contexts previously, it has sounded more permanent. And I think when I heard that, when I read that in the other translation, I was concerned. I was like, wait, I don't understand why the disciples' hearts would be that. But what you're describing, especially an everyday sort of hardening of the heart, like we would experience, that it's really more of a closed, a closed heart
Yeah, I
versus
think
an
that's what it is.
open.
I think all it
Yeah.
is when it's kind of a permanent thing is
Uh-huh.
that they've just decided to shut the door on the spirituality part. So in other words, they've retreated fully into a materialist kind of view, which
Right.
is all that matters is what I can touch and feel, and
Hmm.
that's the only reality. And there came a time where Jesus is knocking, and they're thinking about it, and they retreated into that. They hardened their heart in that they closed that door, and they retreated into the materialist that
Hmm.
they wanted. They were kind of in anyway before, and it was almost, but it wasn't quite enough.
Hmm.
And that's a scary thing, because any of us can do it. It doesn't now. Not any of us can do it. Not from a salvation standpoint. I don't mean that we can harden ourselves off and not be not be saved, not be children of God. But we can do it in areas of our life.
Right. I
We
think
can
that's how
pick a
most people
specific
do it.
area, and we can say, I know that Jesus is kind of pulling me this way, but I just can't trust him. I can't trust him enough to leave my job and go be a missionary. That's a real extreme example, but
Sure.
you know
Yeah.
what I mean.
That is big. Oh my gosh.
Or I can't trust him enough to go talk to my neighbor about Jesus, even if it comes up. I don't want to deal with it,
Right.
right?
Yes. Yeah.
or whatever the case. But anyway, there's a million different ways, and I think we just retreat in it. So it's just making more of them. Sometimes I think that, like when Pharaoh, we talked about him hardening his heart, and then it talks about God
Right.
hardened his heart. I think that it happens sometimes without us knowing it.
Yeah.
That we've made the final decision, we've given ourselves over to materialism, and we've decided against God. After that, it looks like God's hardening our heart, but how do we know the difference from God's perspective? You know what I
Right.
mean? But I think the answer is that was our final chance. It's a tough one. It's a tough
It
one
is
to
a tough
go.
one. And I feel like it was so heavy and so serious. And I know that, I'm introducing another idea that it's just a closed heart
Yeah,
in the disciples' case, but words matter. And so
right.
that word bothered me thinking about the disciples having hardened hearts. When we
Yeah.
talked about Pharaoh's heart being hardened, I was like, that just didn't sit well with me. But I,
That's why I mean, you almost just have to throw away all the other Bible translations except the Message. No, just kidding.
the other Bibles,
No, I'm kidding.
very misleading.
He made it real easy for you. No.
Yeah. It's just kind of fun. Sometimes
No,
I'll
I
read
know. I'm
something and
kidding.
I'll read a line
I
and I
do it
think,
too.
this sounds like something like you would write, it doesn't
Right.
sound biblical. So I'll look it up because I'm
That's what
curious.
Will
Like,
said this morning. It's an okay commentary, I guess.
ah, oh yeah, that's it. Yeah, that's why. If we do a study with the KJV, he might be here, right?
Maybe, maybe.
Well,
But
but
no, that was, I mean,
mhm,
I think it's interesting. Jesus sends, from the whole
mhm,
time, we have to assume that Jesus was always probably going to go to them.
mhm.
Does say he intended to pass them by, which makes me think maybe they were doing better than we give them credit for. And
Mhm.
maybe he thought, they're not doing so bad. You know what I mean?
I mean, it's funny. Just picture him, was he walking by, was he going to wave and be like, "See you there"? I'll meet you there. I mean,
I know it's
it's just kind
crazy.
of funny. It's pretty
I
funny
think
account.
Jesus certainly has a
Yeah.
sense of humor,
Do you think
and
he
I
was
think he
being
was just
funny
like,
here?
I think he thought, man, I'm gonna beat them walking. They're in a boat.
I walked here and beat you. It's hilarious. It's so funny.
But yeah, I don't. And then he gets to the other side,
Yes.
you know, and of course the wind dies down, all that as soon as
Oh,
Jesus
right.
gets in the boat.
He calms the wind again.
But they beach the boat at Gennesaret tied up, and as soon as they're out of the boat, word got around fast, and the people are bringing everybody. I also think it's kind of cool. Wherever he went, village or town or country crossroad, they brought their sick to the marketplace and begged him to let them touch the edge of his coat. That's all. Now, prior to that chick crawling through the crowd on his way to Jairus, I
Right.
don't think anybody ever thought there'd be anything to come from touching his robe. But
Right?
that story got around.
You think so?
I do. I think that story got around far and wide because he made such a big deal about it. And at the
Hmm.
time, everybody thought that Jairus' daughter was dying. Then she did die. I
Right.
mean, this was a spectacle. And word got around, and all they want to do is touch his coat. And it seems like he was like, okay. Because they said whoever touched him got well. I don't know.
Well, again, it's such a demonstration of faith. They're like, you don't even need to touch us. Just let us touch your cloak.
Yeah.
Which probably, now that I say it out loud, probably is where, the Catholics get this concept that garments and things that have touched holy people
Hmm.
are sacred relics. That's probably like where that comes from.
Probably is.
So,
There is a passage in Acts that talks about Paul, and it talks about he was so powerful in the spirit that even handkerchiefs that he touched and things they would take and they would give to the sick and they'd be healed.
wow, there
Now,
you go.
that's a kind of a one-off
You
in the
can thank
Bible,
you
but
can thank Paul and the lady who touched the edge of Jesus's robe for that.
yeah. So I wonder if
It's
Jesus,
interesting.
if God will work through whatever,
Mhm.
maybe whatever we're sensitive enough to, you know what I
Right.
mean?
Yeah.
He'll whatever it takes for us to gain some faith. I
Hmm.
think he'll go that way. If it's all I
Right.
have to do is touch her robe, okay. And
Hmm.
if it's not, if we're doubting Thomas and Thomas says, unless I touch the holes in his hands, I'm not going to believe Jesus will go that far. He'll
Right.
show up and he'll say, "Come here, touch the holes in my," like he'll
Right.
go as far as he can, as far as we'll let him go.
Hmm.
You know what I mean?
Right. He wasn't offended by that at all,
No.
by Thomas. But it's interesting. I think people feel like, touchy stuff. So Paul's handkerchief, for example. Today, someone would be like, oh, that's superstitious. That's this and that. And it's like, if it really comes from a true faith in Jesus and either the healing power or the blessing power of Jesus, I don't feel like there's anything wrong with that.
God doesn't seem to think there's anything wrong with it either.
Right. It's
It's a little
interesting.
weird. What becomes a problem, I think, is, and this is an across the board. This
Mhm.
isn't just a Catholic problem, although the Catholics may personify it best, at least
Okay.
within the Christendom realm.
Yeah.
The problem becomes when we try to take any of those things. In fact, I'll give you another example.
Okay.
Speaking in tongues,
Okay.
right? That's a Pentecostal thing, right?
Okay.
More so. We were at church last week, pastors talking. They're real into
Yeah.
speaking in tongues.
Very
And
like charismatic, like different.
like you
I
need
know
to
Pentecostal.
learn this specific prayer language, just, and it's
Wow.
like just crazy. So you've got
Okay.
Baptist crazy, you got Catholic crazy, you got Pentecostal crazy, right? And
Speaking in tongues is a whole different level.
and I'm not even saying I'm open to it. I've
Yeah.
never personally experienced it. I
Me
don't think
neither.
that the gifts of the Spirit have ceased. I don't think there's any reason to think that.
Okay.
But it's kind of weird. Like, and it
Okay.
doesn't, and it seems to me that there's some value to letting weirdness stay a little weird in the
Mhm.
Bible and not trying to institutionalize it. That's what I was going
Yeah.
to say.
That's a
It's
good
when
way
you
of putting it.
start hauling the relics all over the place that it starts to get a little weird. Do you know what I mean?
Sure. I mean,
And Baptists everybody's got their own version.
yeah. I mean, from
But
a historical standpoint,
yeah, sure. That's kind of cool. Whatever. Mary
um,
Magdalene's skull. Okay.
oh my gosh. But like from, we talked about it before. Like I went there, I thought, hey, if being in the presence of these
Yeah.
relics heals me,
Cool.
great, great. But I just do think that it's cool from a historical
And
standpoint. You
clearly
see something that
sometimes
was
it
like,
does. Once in a while, there's
right.
times there's those weird things that happen.
Yep.
And
So
so
interesting.
where do you do? I think you let God be God, and you but maybe don't
Let
try to
God be
make
God.
a teaching out of it. Don't try to denominate. You know what I mean? Institutionalize it. The
Yeah.
weird stuff.
That's well said, Todd, because it's hard to wrap your brain around the practice of speaking tongues and how it can play a part in someone's life today. And it seems
And
like,
sitting there trying to tell people to practice weird syllables at home. It's just weird.
do
What are
they? Do
you
they try
talking
to
about?
teach it?
Yes.
I thought that you can't teach it. I thought it was like a
The whole thing
spontaneous. Wow. Yeah.
doesn't make any sense to me.
That's pretty far out there for me. And I guess
Wherever
I've
I go to
never.
church, there's always an element of crazy. I feel like.
You
So
know
that
what?
beers with Jesus. There's no crazy here.
There's no crazy here, just maybe politically, but
Whatever crazy we bring, we
that's
don't
funny.
recognize it. That's the important thing.
Well, you know what? That's a good point. Every church probably has a little element of crazy.
Oh, they do. And it's not gonna, that's why people are like, oh my God, if you're really Christian and you wouldn't go to the Catholic church. I don't think that any more than I wouldn't go to the Baptist church. They all got their issues. They all
Right.
got some pretty deep seated issues too. But somehow
Right.
God works in spite of it. I don't think that he thought, you know what? This church is going to be perfect for the 2,000 years I'm gone. I don't think it wasn't made up of any perfect people. I don't know why it would be.
And America is going to be perfect too.
Right.
God
No, he
said
works
so.
through the mess. That's the thing. Even in the disciples, we see that even here. He's in the mess with us.
Mm-hmm.
And he's doing stuff that's just like, yeah, why would he just walk by? I don't know. He just thought, nah, they're all right. It's kind of
All right.
weird.
I'll pave
And
the
maybe
way.
they
I know,
were.
it's
Maybe there
kinda
was more
funny.
to them than what they thought, but yet they freaked out.
So funny.
But it's also encouraging that when they freaked out, that he was real quick to comfort them.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And it also
Sure.
kind of, the other thing is, it's kind of tells us that whatever storms God sends us into, that whenever he eventually shows up, it probably won't be like we think. It won't look like what we think, and we'll probably mistake it for something else. But
Right?
in spite of that,
Mhm.
He's quick to comfort anyway. And he's quick to heal, and he's quick to still the storm. You know what I mean?
Right.
Even though we're probably going to get mixed up in there
I
somewhere.
like that. I like that.
You know what I
Todd,
mean?
I've missed you for 2 weeks. Yeah, this is like
It was good, right?
can't skip 2 weeks again.
I know.
My fault.
That's okay though. We got to get away once in a while.
Yeah, it was our vacation. It was our
That's
summer
right.
vacation. Yeah, no, that's a good lesson I think to take out of this. Really.
Yeah. I mean, at every one of these, Jesus is always there, and he's always kind of,
Mhm.
if he's calling people to it, he's enabling them to do it in ways that seem crazy and seem impossible and that we never would have
Right.
done. But what's important is that in order for him to do it, the people have to, like the disciples have to pass the food out. They have to get in the thing and row. Like a lot of life is just rowing, right?
It is.
They
Life
spent
is
6 hours just
rowing.
rowing before God ever showed up. And God was watching them and praying for them the whole time. And it's wild.
It is.
But he did show up. Just late. He's always late. It always feels like
really.
he's late.
It feels like
It
to
always
us.
feels like we're waiting way too long, and he's
always
way too
feels that-
late.
Always
And
feels that
somehow
way
he
to
makes
us.
it work. It's amazing.
Right.
So
That's funny.
I don't
That's
know.
funny. Yeah.
Well, I think we did all we could do. What do you think?
I think this was really good.
I thought it was good too. People can find us on socials if they care. I haven't been doing much on the socials lately.
Oh, with the site.
Yeah, Todd's World or Todd's World 2023 at the various socials if you want. ToddsWorld.net really is what you should check out for the merch. That's really good. And then the books are on Amazon. Witness.
Oh yeah,
Both?
the books.
No, first season of Witness. I know I got to work on
I'm
Witness. We're
putting you.
working on
I
it.
was going to say about to put you on the hot seat. Do we have a projection for season 2? It's okay if you don't.
I don't yet.
Okay.
I'm trying to figure
It's
it
cool.
out. It's not
I'm
that
really
the writing of it
excited
is
about
that
it.
difficult as much as getting it.
Mhm.
It's a little. I found it more difficult than Insurrection to fit it into a framework of a story. Insurrection, I think I could almost do on autopilot.
Got it. Well, yeah.
Once
Easy
you're
to
into the
fantasize about
story, and
the
you know what I mean.
respective
Witness,
assassinations.
I had a real clear vision for Witness season 1, and I thought it was great.
Yes,
And
it's
then
so good.
once this whole group of the Witness and the RVs took off, I think I was less certain. Probably I feel a lot
Right.
like they did. I don't think Lucas knows what was going to happen either.
Right?
I think we were like, okay.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, so if you're new, please go look up Insurrection and Witness. Pour through scroll and find seasons 1, episodes 1. And
That's
they're
really where
so
Beers
good.
with Jesus came from, was Lucas's,
Yeah.
I titled the episode God Makes Dinner, and I thought I should go back and change it to Beers with Jesus.
You should. Please change
I
it.
think so,
I think
too.
Beers with
Makes
Jesus
sense.
is good.
We
God
can't all
makes
be
dinner.
perfect off the gate.
Happy hour in the woods. I
But
like
the most
it.
important thing is to subscribe here and listen to us, because whatever's
Yep.
and listen to the old stories, but as soon as the new ones come, you'll know.
So good.
You won't miss them. So
Awesome.
and this is a pretty damn good story we're going through right now. I think it's the greatest story ever told.
Yeah. You mean Mark?
Yeah.
Yeah. The story Mark's telling. It's pretty good.
It really doesn't
my
get any
gosh.
better.
Todd, we finished chapter 6.
Good job, Carrie.
Woo! High five.
So next week we're on to chapter 7 in Mark. The source of your
Good.
pollution. Who knows what that's about? I haven't read it yet.
That's what it's called. The source of your pollution. Oh my gosh.
I think he might be going off on the Pharisees, but I'm not I
say,
think he's going off on
see
the Pharisees. It's a whole chapter. There's a little star thing in the middle. We'll see how it goes.
There you go. We're going off on the Pharisees next week.
Woohoo! Everybody loves beating up on Pharisees.
Why not?
I
We
know.
should. It makes us feel holier than
They're
thou.
such arrogant assholes. And there's so many of them that we can relate to in our world.
Right. True.
Too often we might hedge that way a little ourselves, I suppose. All right.
Love it.
Thanks for joining me, Carrie. We'll be back next week.
See you then.